And I hit my rock bottom of panic and anxiety. The body was just like, we're done. And it got to the point where I was so underweight, I stopped having a period, I wasn't sleeping. It felt like that kind of moment of crossroads, like could be the end if I don't get this under control. But nothing was working. Until...
Have you ever experienced a sense of panic? Have you ever experienced a feeling of unease, or maybe in places you are thinking to yourself, I shouldn't be anxious about this? Our next guest, Dr. Nicole Cain, wrote the book Panic Proof, and she is here to help us panic proof our life.
I grew up in a military family where there was a lot of recycled authoritarian parenting. And so there was lots of spanking and lots of punishments, and lots of emotional neglect. The way that little Nicole adapted to that was to become...
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Hi, and welcome to the next Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity podcast. Have you ever experienced a sense of panic? Have you ever experienced a feeling of unease, worry, maybe before a tough conversation, or maybe in places you are thinking to yourself, I shouldn't be anxious about this? What is that? Why do we suffer from panic and anxiety? Our next guest, Dr. Nicole Cain, wrote the book Panic Proof, and she is here to help us panic proof our life. A little bit about Dr. Cain. She is an integrative mental health doctor pioneering trauma-informed care and holistic treatment for panic, anxiety, bipolar, depression, and postpartum conditions. She has a degree in clinical psychology, training in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and she is a licensed naturopathic physician in Arizona. She is the author of the book Panic Proof, the new holistic solution to end your anxiety forever, which I love, which she beautifully narrates herself. Actually, you could just go check it out for the narration. She is also the co-host of the podcast Holistic Inner Balance, which she graciously had me on recently. One of her goals is to help us reframe our panic and anxiety, from villains into allies. Dr. Cain, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here. It's always amazing to get to chat with you.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, before we jump into your area of expertise, I like to go further back. I like to go much further back. What was it like growing up little Nicole? Where did you grow up? What were your parents like? And if there was some event or someone you could pinpoint as the reason you would ultimately become a naturopathic physician, an anxiety expert, an author, a podcast host, what or who would that be?
You know, one of my very first memories, this is the weirdest thing, is playing bingo. I'm 4 years old. I'm in South Carolina, and my first memory is playing bingo. And I think
Did you win?
I have no idea.
Just playing bingo.
I just remember the thrill of seeing the bingo card and this anticipation of like, I could match this thing and get a gold star, whatever it was. It was the thrill in the image of the bingo card that is like my entry into consciousness in this world.
Hello.
I awaken with bingo, and I'll probably go out with bingo. But what's interesting is I feel like that says so much about the life that followed, is that when we look at a bingo card, we have these different images, we have these different portrayals, and as we have experiences, we're trying to make sense of the whole image together. Am I connecting the dots? Do I get a prize? How are these related? How do I find it? My brain was always so curious to understand things. And I grew up in a military family where there was a lot of recycled authoritarian parenting. And so there was lots of spanking and lots of punishments, and lots of emotional neglect, lots of abuse. It was heavy. There were wonderful things, but it was heavy too. And the way that little Nicole adapted to that, coped with that, was to become exceptionally curious about what are the little components that may lead to this kind of a response from my caretaker, that may then lead to this kind of an outcome. And what can I do to leverage that and manipulate that? And kids are incredibly adaptive. Kids are incredibly manipulative. And I don't mean this in a negative way. Manipulating is just changing something, right? And I became very good at cheering up my parents, at detecting when they may be frustrated. I would use behaviors like being silly or being really sweet and becoming very hyper attuned to nuances in body language and tone of voice and scent and sounds and all the things. I was so good at that. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're so sweet." But we all know that people pleasers were oftentimes originally parent pleasers, right? And so those same skills, those same adaptations that were in many ways very life-saving for me as a little person were adaptations that later in life set the foundation for me being quite an anxious young woman. I was very hypervigilant. I overread conversations. I felt responsible for other people's emotions. I always felt like a failure. I always felt like the shoe is going to drop, and I felt this constant need to predict it. I was looking for the bingo card, if you will, to try to see patterns, to try to figure it out. And meanwhile, I'd found a love for medicine. I was in 3rd grade, and it started with first aid books and a fanny pack. And I'm like, I could control my world and fix things with a little bit of triple antibiotic cream and a couple of Band-Aids. I can fix everything. And then I started to develop health issues. And it began with congestion. It progressed to asthma. And then we have these keystone moments, bingo. And then there's this other keystone moment where I was 10 years old and I was in a doctor's office and I was telling them I had asthma. I couldn't breathe when I played outside in the grass. And this memory is the doctor gave me a tube to inhale a clear vapor solution to test to see if I was truly asthmatic. And so I inhaled the vapor solution and it provoked an asthma attack. And so I'm sitting there suffocating. And I look over in terror at the doctor in his white coat, and he's like, "Oh, interesting." And he's writing notes with a clipboard. And one of my parents is sitting there like, "Oh, yes, she's truly suffocating." And the authority
you would hope for.
I know, right? Seriously, parents don't do that. So they gave me an albuterol and I didn't die, and hence I get to hang out with you today. And a couple of things changed in that moment. One is that I am powerless. And 2, I rely on an authority in a white coat, an adult, in many ways a male, to fix me, to give me breath, to take it away. And I was powerless. And so now we have these compounding factors. And so I'm dealing with these health issues. I'm on 6 different prescriptions, multiple inhalers. I'm no healthier. I enter college. I'm a neurotic mess, terrible boyfriends. We repeat the patterns that we haven't healed, right? And so all the world's a stage and everybody different is just a different actor in the same play we create until we heal that. And I decided I didn't really like medicine so much after all. Medicine had really, in many ways, disappointed and failed me, but I was really good with people. And so I went to counseling school. And then there was another keystone event. I'm sitting in rehab with my patients. We're in group therapy. It's 8:00 in the evening. And there's this teenage girl sitting next to me. And we would go around in a circle at the beginning of group, and we would all say our name, the drug of choice, and how long it's been since relapse. And the girl next to me, she said her name. Her drug of choice was cocaine, and she'd been relapsing. And she's saying this while drinking a caffeinated drink like Red Bull or whatever it was. This is the early 2000s. And she was expressing that she was really anxious, panicky, and had insomnia. And I didn't know very much. I knew that it wasn't good. I knew all the cognitive behavioral therapy interventions that we could use. But I'm looking at her drinking this drink and listening to her drug of choice. And I'm like, this girl's stimulating herself. Could we talk about that? And we had to refer her to a doctor. We had to refer her to a psychiatrist because it's out of scope for a counselor. And that doctor gave her Ambien. And I was so indignant when she came back for group that next day. So now, for those who are listening that aren't familiar with Ambien, or Zolpidem is the generic, it's a hypnotic medication that's sedating. It can be very habit forming, and it's not something that you want to give to somebody who is perhaps abusing substances. It can be really dangerous. And I was really upset about that. And I was like, I cannot be a part of this. This is a disappointment too. I have to do more. Can we do better? I got online. This is in Chicago, Illinois. We had no idea what naturopathic medicine is. Functional medicine really hadn't taken the reins yet. I did a little bit of basic Google searching, found the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, and it was like a light bulb went off. I was like, is this real? 3 months later, I started medical school. So we're almost done with this journey of Nicole. So I go through medical school. I work my ass off. Top of my class. I get a residency. I'm still really into mental health and counseling. I had that experience that put me a little bit of a leg ahead of my colleagues who just came straight through school. And I opened an integrative mental health practice, and I'm treating schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And doing great, getting really great results, pedal to the metal. But then that perfectionism, that hypervigilance, that impression management, that neurosis, if you will, I was now the person in the authority position that I used to rely on so much more. I was the person in the white coat, and then I hit my rock bottom of panic and anxiety. The body was just like, we're done. And then suddenly, all of the things that I was suggesting for my patients with anxiety and depression, they weren't working for me. And I hit this most horrific rock bottom, and it got to the point where I was so underweight, I stopped having a period, I wasn't sleeping. My panic and anxiety it felt like that kind of moment of crossroads, like this is could be the end if I don't get this under control. But nothing was working until in this period of deconstruction that I'm sure so many people that you talk with experience, this complete moment. The building has been deconstructed. You're sitting in the rubble. There's nothing left. And all you do is you just start building again, brick by brick by brick. And Panic Proof is the story of that rebuilding. Panic Proof is the story of proving not only to myself, but to the dominant medical model in many ways that our symptoms are data about what needs healing. Our symptoms are stuck adaptations to what did happen to you and what didn't happen to you. And that instead of fighting against those symptoms and trying to suppress them or ignore them or deny them or alchemize them, by actually leaning into them and using them, that's when everything changed. And not only did I get better, but I thrived. And so that is how we got here today. That's the story of Nicole and Panic Proof.
Bingo is the story of little Nicole, culminating with Panic Proof.
Yes.
That's pretty awesome. So we have a parallel. My dad was in the Air Force. Did you move every 2 years, or what did your kind of,
Yeah.
So you're moving every 2 years. That's a particular type of adaptation, right? Like your best, I kind of describe it as I would build a best friend in about 2 years because that's all you had, and then you walk away and build another, which can give the opportunity for making changes, right? It's much easier when you walk into a new environment to make those changes. And then you have this concept you can fix everything accept yourself, right? And then you come to be powerless to an adult male, typically, who, as you described, just has no compassion, right? So that's something that you are clearly looking for. I often think that people who go into psychology, go into counseling, are looking for definitions for themselves or insights into themselves. It's not just about other people and maybe their experience with other people's because they're going through what they go through. You mentioned Ambien. It's crazy that's in my opinion that's in the market. Like you look at what it does. I wish I had gotten my father off of Ambien sooner. I don't know how much of an impact, but it wouldn't have been negative to get him off of that. And then you start your practice with schizophrenia. You just didn't mess around, right? Like I'm going to start with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Now you hit this rock bottom, right? And so what now you're building brick by brick, right? And there's probably parallels. So maybe it's kind of like I'm saying, hey, tell the stories that you have in Panic Proof with your journey. Like, so step one is, let me figure out how to assess where I'm at on a daily basis. And you have a red light, yellow light, green light process. Let me understand the different types of anxiety. I think it's 9 different types of anxiety. So walk us through some of that. If you can. I know that's broad. It's like, hey, just tell us this story. By the way, here's your book. I have it, a copy of it. Tell us this story. Go.
Yes. We start with understanding what is going on. And we do that by looking at our symptoms with fascination and curiosity as opposed to as problems to be solved. And I think that nuance, that distinction is really important because if we go to if you have anxiety and you go to a standard allopathic doctor, they may suggest to calm the anxiety. They may give you an antidepressant or a benzodiazepine like Xanax or something. And if you go to a functional doctor that also sees anxiety as a problem, they may recommend also suppressive or anxiolytic categories of treatments, but they may use natural things like theanine and kava kava. But the paradigm shift that I'm describing is looking at anxiety for clues. Okay, so we have anxiety. And let's say that the anxiety in particular is I'm gesturing to the chest, but actually let's talk about it's in the gut. And there's a case of Esme in the book that I talk about with this. So Esme, she has anxiety. She has anxiety in the gut. And she'd been to lots of doctors. They were giving her proton pumps inhibitors. They were giving her antidepressants. They were giving her anxiolytics. She had taken Xanax. She'd actually taken Ambien. A lot of people I work with have taken Ambien, myself included. And she continued to have these symptoms. And so then what we want to do is we want to understand what these symptoms are telling us. And we can do that with history taking, a clinical assessment, and oftentimes laboratory testing. So the keystone events I kind of touched on, these are the moments in our history taking. These are the moments that we had to adapt to. So if you go to the pool, you have a nice cup of water, go for a swim, it isn't really stressful or significant, you don't really adapt to that. But if you move from Arizona to Canada and you go to Toronto and you're in Canada, it's cold. You have to adapt in order to survive. You put on a coat. And then if you go back to Arizona and you are wearing that coat, you have to continue to adapt. You take that coat off. We're looking for moments of adaptation. And moments of adaptation can be stressors, they can be trauma triggers, it could be environmental exposures. I know you're really well versed in mitochondrial function, so we might look at what systems are in place that might have been stressed, compromised, interfered with. So we look at keystone events, we look at what happened or what didn't happen, and we look at the ways that that adaptation may occur. And then once we know what that is, conceptually, we can go in and oftentimes we can do functional testing and get more objective measures, more information. Maybe it's blood, maybe it's serum, stool, MRIs. And then once we know the cause, know the way that the body is adapting to that, then we can start the process of reverse engineering that. And we have in naturopathic medicine the therapeutic order. And this teaches us how to reverse engineer that. It teaches us how to think about it. In naturopathic medicine, it's distinctly different from other forms of medicine in that a part of our philosophy is that the body is designed to heal itself. And our job as doctors is to give the body what it needs so that it can do its work, to remove obstacles to healing, to tonify systems that need a little bit more energy, that need tonification, strengthening, right? Need a little bit more zhuzh. And to also correct structural integrity, putting the body back into place. And so once the body's back in place and it's been given that energy and we've removed all those obstacles to cure, we've given the body what it needs, and now we're supporting those feedback loops, the body will take care of the rest. But this requires a quite curious and nuanced approach to understanding what anxiety is, which is quite a lot different than what I'd been doing, what I'd received as a patient. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. Symptom comes up, we make it go away, whack that mole, but it's going to come up somewhere else because the root imbalance isn't corrected. And so that's what the journey of panic proof is it teaches us how to think differently about our symptoms so that we can be empowered to recalibrate them.
So you get this naturopathic training, you start your practice with really challenging cases. Through this training, right, I have to imagine, well, one, when you're in school, you end up pushing through all sorts of stuff. So you may have been in ill health and just pushing through because I've got an exam on Thursday. Like I don't have time to whatever. Yes, I feel panicky. And so what? Like I literally have no choice. You get into your practice, so things are settled, and now things really start manifesting. As you were going through naturopathic school, were you kind of thinking about how you could address your own things, or that was a total sideline? You were like, get school done.
I was able to, in naturopathic school, get off of all of my prescriptions.
Excellent.
And that was absolutely amazing. However, I think that we still have opportunities to improve naturopathic education, where I think that sometimes the education can be quite green allopath, which is symptom management. And I ended up really leaning on a lot of our old fathers of naturopathic medicine in terms of wisdom that I garnered after the rubble had fallen. Because it's so much easier in many ways to CBT yourself, to exercise yourself, to mind body yourself, to suppress with symptoms. You know, you're tired, you drink a bunch of coffee, that feels a heck of a lot better than so many harder things that are involved in figuring out why I'm tired, right? And so while I was managing symptoms, there was this big pink elephant in the room. I was just walking circles around it. And eventually your body's in its mercy, I would say, and its compassion and a gift to us is when the body speaks loudly. It's just uncomfortable to listen.
Yeah, well, because it's mapping out a path that requires a lot of work. You mentioned, to address, to approach these things with fascination and curiosity, and I think there's a parallel with the compassion that you didn't get. To address them with the compassion that you didn't get from that asthma physician. So you have the breakdown. You're building things back up. Did you start doing some testing on yours? Like, where was the first So did you start right away with testing, or had you already done a lot of that, and so that's what enabled you to get off a lot of the medications or all the medications? Like, what was that kind of walk back now?
Yeah, in the process of rock bottom melting down, I spent thousands of dollars on supplements and testing. I did organic acid tests, I did Dutch test, I did blood test. I was cash pay everything. I was a student. I qualified for Medicaid at the time, which covered nothing integrated that I wanted to do. So I'm like spending my teeny tiny student loans on this. And I tried herbal medicines. I tried Ayurveda medicines. I let someone pour oil on a third eye. I did yoga. I did chiropractic medicine. I took supplements. I tried biohacking. I did all of the things. And I couldn't figure out why the hell I was so anxious. It was very body-based. It was very somatic, which is something that we see oftentimes in trauma and in adaptive mechanisms, is that we see this divide between our logical executive parts of the brain, prefrontal cortex, we call that your executive control network, and what is stored in the body. And Bessel van der Kolk, we all refer to his 2014 book, The Body Keeps the Score, and he was so spot on with that language, is that oftentimes it's stored in parts of the body where we may not even have access to memory, access to language, access to time. And the body's just going to keep doing what it's doing until we're able to go in and reprogram that. Thank God for neuroplasticity. We can go in and reprogram that. But the brick by brick where things actually started to change was when I was willing to sit in the panic and anxiety and do a lot of somatic based work. And so you talked about one of your questions. By the way, you asked the most thoughtful questions, Chris.
Thank you.
Is EMDR, neurolinguistic programming, somatic based body awareness movement exercises. That was really profound for me because it's uncomfortable. It's out of the logical place. I live up here. This is where I'm happy, right? It's where I'm in control. And so going into the body was really important. And the fear of the fear, facing that. So I don't know if you've ever had a panic attack, but it feels like it's going to kill you. And so when I ask my patients, I'm like, we have to start working towards going in that and holding space and being in that yuck. Is patients are like, it's going to kill me. It's going to be the end of me. I'm going to go insane. I hear that all the time. I'm going to have a heart attack. And so that main brick by brick was going in step by step. But then as we go in step by step, we want to work with all of those layers that come up. So they often describe healing as an onion. So you take a step closer, you peel that layer of the onion, and now we have these complementary biomechanical adaptations that happen. We recalibrate that, peel off a layer, take another step, get a little deeper. Ooh, early childhood. Yuck, this is painful. Oh my gosh, I haven't had asthma in so many years. Now the asthma's coming back. We recalibrate those biomechanical mechanisms, those adaptive pathways that have been holding me out of attunement, clear that step by step. So that's kind of how the process looked. And it's so beautiful, unique, fascinating, and individualized.
I have to imagine that a unique aspect of your training is that you were a counselor first, right?
Yeah.
So that you're in a position to we can address these things and we should be addressing, is there some mold toxicity? What is it that might be there? And then at the same point, these are in fact supposed to be serving you and now probably no longer serve you. So I want to talk about the experience of, say, panic and anxiety. Like, we've all had the experience. We've locked our keys in the car or whatever, and it's a flush of panic. And does everyone experience this? Are there genetic factors that impact anxiety and even, specifically, maybe more specifically, panic attacks?
This is such a good nuanced question, so I'll answer it in parts. So the first part is you have this really great example I think most of us can relate to is you lock your keys in the car. And so we have a provocating event. So we have a potentially activating event. But when it comes to adversity, trauma, adaptations, it's less about the provocating event and more about how we experience that event. And we've learned about trauma over the years, and the research into trauma is that trauma isn't defined as the event. It's not a traumatizing event, but rather the event is something that overwhelms our ability to cope. It changes the way that we think about ourselves, others in the world, and the way that our body, mind, and our nervous system responds. These are these keystone events. So something changes. So in this example, if someone is in a state of adaptation where adversity, feeling powerless, I can't get into my car, where that has been associated with, everything will work out. It always is fine in the end. They may just like take a walk and go and make a phone call or get a coffee or something like that. It's no big deal. But somebody else who had a completely different experience or in a different situation, maybe it's winter or summer and their kids are locked in the car, whatever it is, and they may experience sheer powerlessness and panic. And so their experience will be different. And so then the second part of your question is, well, what are the predisposing factors? Well, one is the stored programming, because we all have stored programming. And that stored programming comes from our genetics. It comes from our microbiome. Interestingly, our oral microbiome, our gut microbiome, our skin and our brain microbiome. Wow. Yeah. Those predispositions can come from learned belief systems, ways of thinking about ourselves, others' personal sense of power. So everybody experiences fear, but not everybody experiences fear in all the same contexts.
As you're kind of describing that, I can imagine that in some instance, locking the keys in the car is a representation of making a mistake, and depending on how you grew up, maybe in a military family, making mistakes was very frowned upon, to put it gently, and orally, not physically.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. Okay. So I've got that. Panic attacks specifically, because I've been around, I haven't experienced a panic attack other than those like moments, right, where it's just, sheer panic and then like, oh, we're going to be okay, right? And that's not what you're generally trying to deal with in panic proof, right? Like those are things that you're managing well. But panic attacks are fairly common, right? I may have looked up a stat, and maybe you have a stat. And so one of the things I always like to think about is, if panic attacks are very common across us as humans, and we certainly all experience some form of anxiety from time to time, is there a beneficial adaptation of this? Like if you go back to evolutionary psychology, what's the benefit of a panic attack, right? Like we're in the middle of a panic attack. Like how is this conceivably helping, or is it just miswiring? And we've shared an email thread, but I'd love your kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah. Fear is evolutionarily favorable. And the thing that I think really strikes people when I say this is that your brain isn't concerned about your well-being. It's concerned about your safety. And so, evolutionarily speaking, somebody who's gathering berries in the woods and hears the growl of a hungry tiger in the woods and is able to effectively mount a fear response that is strong enough to quickly get them out of danger will be more apt to be able to reproduce and pass that trait on to their descendants, as opposed to somebody who maybe has a blunted fear response, or perhaps those who flop and they aren't able to get away or fight the danger. And the thing is that our brain isn't very good at discerning real from danger sometimes. Have you ever heard of the study of the little Albert study with the kid and the bunny?
No.
Okay, so this is an old, they were so mean to kids back in the day. There's this study. They took this little baby named Albert and they sat him down and they put a fluffy bunny in front of him. And he's like reaching out and he's touching the bunny. He's like, oh, this is so nice. And happy, happy bunny, no fear. The next time they put him in front of the bunny, they blast a loud horn behind him and scare the living daylights out of him. They repeat that stimulus. They expose him to the bunny, the loud horn. And so then he started to cry when the bunny came near, even if there wasn't a scary horn.
It's the Pavlovian effect. Like this is not rocket science, right?
Right.
Anymore.
So what we found in that research that was, I think, of particular interest in this conversation is that his fear became generalized to all sorts of fuzzy critters. And so people who experience panic and anxiety, oftentimes that feels like out of the blue, or I have no idea why I'm having this response. It could be that, number one, they have this predisposition to having anxiety to begin with, perhaps evolutionarily favorable. And secondly, is that the body has stored some sort of association with that cue that's in their environment as dangerous. And the salience network is an association of brain areas and the insular, the thalamus, and it's scanning all of the data in the environment, billions and billions of data points from your external environment, your internal environment. And its job is to decide, is this relevant? And I need to pass it on to the amygdala, the emotional processing part of the brain, or is this irrelevant? We can ignore it. We ignore lots of stuff going on around us. But there may be things in the environment that we don't know that the insula sends to the amygdala, and the amygdala asks the hippocampus, hey, have we seen this before? Memory part of the brain. The hippocampus is like, oh yeah, this reminds us of this, this, and that. And then the amygdala will send on a fear signal to your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and we may be panicking before the prefrontal cortex, your logical brain, even knows what's going on. And so not only is this biologically wired into the human brain where emotions travel faster than thoughts and logic, but then these stored programs that are adaptations that are trying to protect us can become maladaptations that actually create panic and anxiety, which can feel like they come out of the blue.
Yeah, because you can't, you feel them, you can't explain them. And in fact, when you try to explain them, they make no sense.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
So the traditional ways to address these, right? And you went to school and learned some of these, maybe not so much as from a psychiatrist perspective, but certainly some of that training, I would imagine. It's about the chemical imbalance theory. But that's not a complete picture. Like how do you view the chemical imbalance? Well, first off, what is the chemical imbalance theory, and how do you kind of view that theory?
Yeah, I write about this in, I think, chapter 6 in the book. And so the chemical imbalance theory came from when they discovered a teeny little cell in the gut, and they called it enteramine, which is serotonin. And so they're like, wow, this is an amazing, groundbreaking discovery. What does it do? And they found that if you were to manipulate the levels of that neurotransmitter so that there were more serotonin available, that interestingly, some people felt better. And so there's a big jump in conclusion. Oh, more serotonin means less depression. Less serotonin means more depression. Therefore, depression must be caused by an imbalance in serotonin, and we just got to give people more. And so then naturally, pharmaceutical companies were like, let's try to help give more serotonin. So they created Prozac. It was the first psychiatric medication. It took more than 20 clinical trials to beat placebo, but that's neither here nor there.
We don't have to talk about that.
That's neither, right?
Beat placebo.
Yay, it beats placebo one time in one study. And so since
by the way, I've just had some conversations recently about this because in our mind, like we just said, it beats placebo. And the way that I've always interpreted that, and probably a lot of the audience, is like, oh, great, then it cures depression. No, it has some impact on depression or whatever it is they're trying to address. And it can be as low as a 3% difference. And now you have a viable medication. That's crazy, but go ahead.
Touche. I love it. Yes, it's true. And so then we made this gap, this leap across this huge chasm, and now it's a cause and effect. And not really much changed. And this was in the 1960s until around 2022. There's this giant meta-analysis that was done looking at the research papers pertaining to the philosophy that a chemical imbalance, aka balances in your neurotransmitters, so serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline, things like that. That's the cause of mood disturbances. And it turns out that was completely unsubstantiated. The data did not say that. And so 2022, we're like, our main understanding of mental health is now out the window, and it leaves us scratching our heads. And I think that's the best place to be in medicine and research, because when we don't know, that's when we get to start being curious, right? We get to start asking questions. So your depression is probably not caused by a chemical imbalance. Maybe it could be. Some people do truly feel better, but it may not be because your serotonin goes up. Some antidepressants tend to be a little bit anti-inflammatory. And there are also domino effects that can occur with these medications. So it's not necessarily like stop your antidepressant, they don't do anything. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the conclusion that we drew that says that a chemical imbalance is the cause of your depression, that is not a scientifically rigorous conclusion.
So is it possible that the chemical imbalance is in fact the cause, but the solution is significantly more complex than just introducing more of that more or less, or trying to control that specific chemical?
I think that's a really brilliant hypothesis.
Still not cause, but yeah.
I like the direction that you're going, though, because you're looking at, we know that manipulating chemicals in the brain can create changes, but how do we get between the letter A and the letter Z? What are all of the letters in the alphabet, all the biofeedback loops in the middle of that? We don't know. We don't know. We have tons of theories, and I talk about tons of them in the book, but wow, we have a lot of questions that we don't have answered, and I think that's really exciting for mental health.
My impression is that there are a lot of medications that, great for depression, also may cause suicide, right? Like there's these situations where it's counterintuitive. I think even Ambien falls into, hey, great for sleep, but you may find yourself driving down the middle of the road still asleep later, right? Like, so it really is significantly more complex than I think that theory suggests. All right, so I
want to interject there really quickly. I think what you're pointing at is something really important, is that even if symptoms are mitigated, we don't see evidence of greater health. And I think that what you just pointed out was really important, and really, I think something to think about is, okay, maybe the goal is to solve the problem of anxiety and you're not anxious anymore, but now you're suicidal. Well, I solved the problem, but we don't see greater health. And I think that's the rate limiting step. So thanks for letting me interrupt you there first.
Yeah, no, I like that. So again, it goes back to kind of traditional medicine tends to be the whack-a-mole situation, as opposed to like, hey, there's a whole game here, and if you could just get under the game, you can figure some stuff out. All right, so you have a red, yellow, green light system. You talk about that. And I want to change things up just for the sake of neuroplasticity. I want to start with your 9 types of anxiety. So what are the 9 types of anxiety? We need to be pretty quick about this because I want to get to this. I think this is some of the real value in the book, and then your red, yellow, and green light, also some of the value. And so I want enough of a teaser that people are interested in going. And then you have a really, I don't know if you use this, you have a really risque story that I think you probably should be using for all of your marketing, involving sex and nudity and running down a street. But we'll talk about that after we talk about our 9 levels of anxiety, or types of anxiety.
Yeah, let's go through these fairly quickly. The anxiety is different for everybody. If you ask all of your friends what it's like when they feel the most anxious, you'll probably get somewhat varied responses. Some people, when they get really anxious, it shows up in their thoughts. You future trip, you worry, you overanalyze. Maybe you get called on and your mind goes blank. Maybe you get obsessive, intrusive, looping thoughts. Maybe you have ADHD type symptoms and you just can't focus. So that's thought anxiety. Nervous system anxiety is when the nervous system is the part of the body communicating, and that will involve maybe you experience headaches, or numbness and tingling. Some people, when they panic, they say, I can't feel my face or my toes or my fingers. Some people, their shoulders shrug higher and higher. Their nervous system is speaking. The chest is a very common place. Heart pounding, heart skipping beats, air hunger, hyperventilation. I feel like I can't get a deep enough breath. There's an elephant on my chest. Gut anxiety. Some kids, especially when they get anxious, they get an upset tummy, diarrhea, gas, bloating. Some people get heartburn. They get burpy. Immune system anxiety. I think this is where you really shine, Chris, is supporting people with immune system anxiety. When we think about immune system, think about histamine. Histamine is that neurochemical that can create the itchy eyes, watery eyes, postnasal drip, skin rash. Histamine is also stimulating to the nervous system as adrenaline. And we see anxiety often going hand in hand with chronic immune system issues. Endocrine anxiety, we know that sometimes the root causes of anxiety could be thyroid, it could be cortisol, it could be your sex hormones. Anger anxiety, this is anxiety that in Ayurveda, it gives us even more nuance in how it shows up, where it's anger, frustration, and I feel like we could be very unkind to the fight part of fight, flight, freeze. Oh, you shouldn't be angry. You need anger management. But it may actually be anxiety, and that anxiety may be a maladaptive mechanism, right? And then we have depressive anxiety, where it's a mix of depression with anxiety, and then trauma anxiety, which arguably should be the umbrella of all of them. But if the main thing of the main thing for you is there's an event, you're having intrusive thoughts about the event, nightmares about the event, you're avoiding the event, something phobic, then you really want to focus on that first, which is why I parsed that out. So those are all 9.
I love it. So one of the things I can always look back, I remember I used to be in choir, probably middle school, and at some point I realized that I would get sick for every choir event. And I put it together that there was some nerves or something. So I'm singing and I've got, a sinus, and I've struggled with sinus for a lot of my life. But it was the first time I was like, I'm causing this somehow. I don't know exactly how, but it is something that I'm in charge of. And I don't know if I ever did much with it, in terms of trying to address it or overcome it or whatever. But yeah, so that would be immune anxiety. Like, here, let's go ahead and get sick, then we can try and get out of this. And by the way, I never let myself. I could have convinced my mom to get out of it. I never let myself get out of it, which was the nerves. All right, so we've got our 9 types. You've got a red, yellow, green light system. Talk about that system, so people can have, hey, maybe they can steal a couple ideas before they get the book.
Yeah, think of anxiety on a spectrum, where the green light represents feeling very calm, grounded, clear in the body. You want to think about what puts you in the green light zone, what helps you feel that way. And you also want to look at what your thoughts, your behaviors, and your sensations and your emotions are when you're in the green light. As we get activated in all of the ways, it could be sexual arousal, it could be anger, it could be fear, it could be excitement, it could be anything. As we get activated in arousal, there will be this moment, I call it the pay attention zone. And this is the moment between green and yellow. And this is where, I might be getting a little activated right now. And if we can provide a corrective intervention in that moment, that one gives us an incredible sense of power. Personal power is the antidote to anxiety. And second of all, that awareness, that corrective experiences promotes neuroplasticity. It changes that programming that we inherited. If, however, we don't notice it, or we're not able to address it, or we don't know how to address it, we'll go into yellow. Yellow is that state of kind of activation. My heart is pounding. My thoughts are racing. I'm getting the nerves. I feel little sniffles, immune system. I'm feeling a little frustrated, whatever it is. As that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, if we don't address it or we're not able to resolve that, then it could go into crisis. And so for some people, this this process of green light to red light, panic, crisis, rage, suicidality, whatever it is, immune system collapse, it could be very, very quick. And so what I do with a lot of patients is we're trying to increase the connection between our logical brain and what's happening in the body from a place of power so that we can start making interventions before we get to crisis. So that's the stoplight.
And when you say activated, right? Because in the context of like a sexual experience, you want some activation. How do you help people identify like the difference between like, hey, this is good activation, and obviously like when you're running, you're having good activation, and then kind of the negative activation. Like, how would you help somebody distinguish those two things?
Yeah, we need, in order to have a complete sexual experience where we're able to have an orgasm, is we have to start parasympathetic. And so you're feeling rested. And that's why they talk a lot about foreplay and taking your time or being in a state of relaxation, right? That could, especially for cisgender females, that could be very, very important and helpful. And then we go into arousal, and then you have that climax. And that climax, we see a spike of adrenaline, but with that, we also see a spike of dopamine, and we see a spike of serotonin, and we see a spike of oxytocin. If we have somebody who's in that yellow or red zone, and then we add arousal on top of that in a context of feeling perhaps there's been something dangerous with feeling aroused in the past, or maybe there's been a negative sexual experience in that particular kind of stimulation, that arousal, if that oxytocin isn't present, and if we already have neuroplastic wiring for fear, that could be very scary. And so you hinted at Aria, and Aria had all of that high stress before going into a sexual experience. She was using polypharmacy, and during climax, she actually had a horrific panic attack. And the story of Aria is epic, and so you guys can read the book to hear more about it. But that was her experience. We had to recalibrate how to be aroused from a place of power and excitement and not fear.
So in some regard, to really help somebody distinguish these things, it's really about understanding where they ultimately land. If they land in yellow or red, what are the activation signals that they would normally see as they're going into those, and that they will actually have a fairly clear understanding of those in most of the cases. That makes sense. So I did ask this, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, this particular question. One, what is EMDR? I've actually never tried it. I've heard about it. Why do you think it works? Are you familiar? And I think we can tie all these together. The NLP phobia technique. Are you familiar with it? And have you tried it? By the way, I have. It's crazy how well that bizarrely simple process works. But like, talk about EMDR and this phobia technique.
EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a form of therapy that's done by counselors or psychotherapists. Most of our insurance plans will cover that. So for those who are like, ooh, I'm interested in this, you might look at psychologytoday.com, and you can filter for EMDR specifically as a modality and your insurance and your zip code. And the idea of EMDR is that maladaptations get stored in the mind and the body and the nervous system. And the goal is to reprogram those adaptations. And it's done using a very, very specific 8-phase protocol. It can be very somatic based, as we were kind of talking about earlier. Sometimes trauma gets stored in parts of the body where there's no language, there's no time. And that's one way that it varies just a little bit from the neuro-linguistic programming, which is based on the principle that maladaptive patterns, associations, and responses can be unlearned, where they may be, and I'm curious to know exactly how it was done with you, but my experience is that the individual is using controlled dissociation, which I love because dissociation is part of how we naturally respond in some ways to anxiety. We step out or dissociate from the phobic memory, and we view it from a distance, kind of like you're watching it on a television or watching a movie. and that can reduce the emotional intensity. But what's a little bit different about that is, in many ways, this particular modality does rely somewhat on having a memory and having something that you can visually target and process. But they both work with clearing that.
So with EMDR, are you getting an individual kind of into some sort of state, into some sort of experience? And then I know it's a lot of it is the eye movements back and forth, because I've had somebody talk about this and I was thinking about it and I was like, well, if your eyes are darting back and forth, like if you go back, I like to go back to evolutionary, this is usually because of danger. And if you're actually able to kind of tie danger and then walk it back, then you could be creating associations between, well, it's not actually dangerous, even though you're kind of mirroring the danger you felt in that situation and then walking it back because you're not in danger. Does that sound right?
I think that's really interesting. I think that's a brilliant hypothesis. And we also see that back and forth movement in REM sleep, which is why Francine Shapiro, when she was studying a lot of hypnotherapy at this time. And so she's looking at what's happening with the conscious processing in dreams and REM sleep and what might be going on in the unconscious. What we are seeing more in recent research is that we think it may be more dual awareness processing. So what we mean by dual awareness is that we're going into areas of the brain that, or the nervous system, areas that are storing this trauma or this keystone event. And we're almost back in time, right? It can feel like it's happening again. So maybe like Esme, who had the gut anxiety, her anxiety started when she was a little girl and she got kicked in the gut by an abusive parent. And so the body remembers that. And so in the book, I give you a transcript of walking her through that. And so she's having these parts of the brain that are getting activated. She's remembering it. She's re-experiencing it, the thoughts, the emotions, the sensations, the smells, the sounds. She almost kind of reverted into little Esme. And then we're stimulating her with movement and with touch. We're here in the moment. We're here in the moment. We're here in the moment. We're here in the moment while we're activating those past patterns. And this, I'm getting goosebumps as I think about this, because this is such incredible, innovative neuroplastic interventions where we're just using our body to timestamp it in the present, say we're in the here, we're in the now, we're no longer back in the past. We're going to open up Pandora's box and we're going to rebuild those bricks. We're going to start rebuilding out of the rubble. And within 3 sessions, she no longer satisfied the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. It was incredible. And it was just using the power of her body.
Well, 2 things come to mind. Like, one, how I think we could say amazing and also dysfunctional is our brain, right? Because it's just crazy. Yeah, and so the phobia technique is really create a picture where you're safe after the event. It involves a movie theater and you kind of pulling yourself out of yourself, right? And create an image of you after the event where you were safe, and then before the event where you're safe, and then you literally say, "I'm going to count 3, 2, 1," and say zip, and you're going to play everything back to where you were safe. And this is just, you're not even, like, there's no way they're visualizing, oh, the dog bit me and then blood came out and then I was terrified and my parents responded in a bad way. There's no way that's actually happening, 3, 2, 1, zip. But it just reframes it somehow. And I don't, like, I think I understand EMDR, which I didn't even really know what it was, better than I understand this NLP phobia technique.
Yeah.
And by the way, it wasn't done on me. I read it in an NLP book, and I have people have, like, the one case, we had a good friend terrified of snakes. And so you do this kind of, hey, imagine a snake on the table. You see the physical recoil. So there's 0 doubts that she has it. You do this simple visualization of the first time she had some encounter with a snake. That Halloween, she was Medusa. Like, it's crazy.
Hallelujah, that's amazing. The brain.
on myself one time, and then we got to get into our wrap up questions. I used it on myself one time, driving in Panama, really close to the edge of the road. There was a pretty big drop off. The wheels dropped off, and I just kept turning tighter and tighter. When I finally did, the car jerked into the lane. No other cars, no accident, whatever. But I was reliving this moment with so much emotion for so long, which the emotion, the learning is slow down and stay there. That's fine. You should keep that. The emotion had zero value. Finally, I did that process on myself, and the emotions are gone. The learning is there. That's one of the things that your brain is going to hold on to is, hey, I can't let this go because this is what's keeping me safe. And it turns out you can let the emotions go and keep the learning. So, I don't know if you wanted to comment or anything before we jump into our wrap-up questions.
I think that's brilliant. And I think of it for your listeners, think of it as we're trying to start a car, and the engine, when we aren't able to free ourselves or rescue ourselves and we get stuck and the starter isn't working and the engine doesn't turn over, we're going to somatically re-experience that because the body wants to close that loop. And so it sounds like what you were able to do with NLP quite effectively is you did the whole loop. You turned over the engine. You got from the beginning to the end. So we don't need to keep replaying that anymore. And I think that's incredibly brilliant, effective, and simple.
Yeah, it was cool. It was an NLP book, and I've probably used it like 10, 15 times. It's kind of amazing to do. All right, here are our wrap-up questions. Dr. Cain, do you have a target age that you want to live to? Now, I know this is not it's not panic related or whatever, but this is a longevity podcast, so we've got to push you on this. What is the target age that you would like to live to?
As long as I'm able-bodied and 1 year fewer numbers of years than my husband.
Does he know this? Have you mapped?
I've told him.
Okay.
I'm like, you got to take your ESS 60 so you can outlive me.
And now so we know that number is not next year. What year would you like it to be?
I think I would be really happy to getting to 100, although I believe that we get celestially reassigned.
So there's another journey.
Yeah, I think so.
How long do you think humans can live?
I mean, I've questioning that because I figured, like 70, 80, 90, and then I've been talking to you, and so now I'm wondering, well, maybe we can increase. We've seen 90% longevity improve, so in my studies, right? So maybe we can live 110, 120.
Well, and the oldest lived human at this point is 122.
See, yeah, well, maybe we could get to 140. We'll be like Moses. How old was he? He's like 800 or something.
Yeah, there are some crazy numbers. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Okay, so what are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets? Let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts to longevity and a long health span that you would share.
Yeah, number 1 is remove obstacles to cure. So it's not always about what you can add, but think about what you need to remove that might be getting in your way. Number 2, I would say combat the nocebo. The nocebo is the opposite of the placebo, right? So placebo is we think something will help us, therefore it will. And the nocebo is where we think that it will not help us, and then it won't. So try to combat the nocebo. And then I think the third would be make sure that you give the body what it needs. And so check in with yourself and ask, what is it I need today? Mind, body, spirit. Maybe that means that you go outside and you put your feet in the dirt. Maybe it means that you go to Toronto on vacation.
I needed that. I really like that one. And that one can be challenged, like give you what you need, because we do have a natural draw for laziness. And it's not laziness, it's energy conservation. Our body believes that we're on the plains of Africa or wherever, and that we're not going to have a meal in days potentially. And so you should sit on the couch and literally do nothing because you need to conserve energy for when you do actually have to find food. So you have that pull. And then we also have, a drive. I think you're like me, very much a purpose driven person. And so like how you've got to have the right listening of like, yes, I can push through and help more people, but I also need to take care of myself. So I think that's a really important point, and we'll leave the audience to figure out how to manage the two. Now, Are there one or two things that you think people get absolutely wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
The number one thing, it kind of echoes the last question, but I think the number one thing is not removing obstacles to cure. I think that people think that they can diet or supplement their way out of pathological relationships, jobs, habits. So I think that the most important thing that you can do to not get it wrong is to look at obstacles to cure.
And when you say obstacles to cure, are you kind of talking about self-reflection and understanding what is and isn't causing stress regularly?
Yeah, it could be that. It could be I'm sick because I live in a moldy house. It could be I'm sick because I'm in an abusive relationship. It could be I'm sick because I smoke cigarettes. So you want to look at all of these factors that could be getting in the way of you getting the results you want.
Okay. All right. And how can people contact you?
I would love to see you on Instagram. I interact there. It's Dr. Nicole Cain. And you can find me on my website, Dr. Nicole Cain, and on my podcast. And come see Chris. It's the Holistic Inner Balance podcast.
And what in the near future are you excited about?
I'm excited to go back to Arizona and do a lot of hiking because I've been in this period, I think you can relate, is producing and writing and promoting my book, Panic Proof. And so in the beginning of the new year, I'm going to be doing like 3 months of rejuvenation and rest because I think the do is an obstacle to cure. So I'm excited about the nothing.
Excellent. You deserve it. You deserve the nothing. That's awesome. All right. You can find her at Dr. and that's DR, right? Dr.
Yes.
Nicole Cain, and then drnicolecain.com. Check out her podcast, Holistic Inner Balance. And Dr. Cain, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to hang with you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.